The Scream franchise has one of the most interesting pasts in the horror genre. Born from the creativity and experimentation of Wes Craven's New Nightmare, it single-handedly revived the dead slasher genre in the late 90s, and a new wave of slashers quickly followed it. Movies like Urban Legend, Cherry Falls, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and who could forget the classic, I Think I Saw What You Did That Time at Grandpa's, I'm not 100% sure but I'm gonna kill you anyway. But the new slasher revival was short-lived, and the franchise died after the somewhat disastrous third movie. And then nothing. 11 years had to pass before Scream 4 tried to introduce Ghostface to a new generation, but it clumsily arrived on the scene, at a time when horror audiences had largely moved on to paranormal and supernatural type horror. Learn to read the room, Ghostface! Now, another 11 years have passed and we have Scream 2022. Scream 5, or just plain Scream, the fifth installment of the series, and the first one not directed by horror legend Wes Craven. And this time, Scream isn't reviving any genre, because it's already following the blood trails left behind by Halloween 2018, Halloween Kills, and other movies in this mini slasher revival we got going on. But is Scream 5 good enough to at least revive its franchise? Let's find out. Scream 5, and I'll be calling it that from now on, opens exactly like the original movie. A lone teen gets a call from Ghostface, who taunts her before eventually attacking. No flashy Scream 4 fake-out intros here. New lead character Sam Carpenter gets introduced. No. Quickly followed by the rest of the new cast, and the killer guessing game begins. Then it's your standard Scream affair with Ghostface popping up to whittle down the cast, and all the new characters meet for the Scream patented meta monologue and proceed to point fingers at each other. I love it that when somebody gets killed, they instantly all just start suspecting their friends and family. We get all the original characters returning. There's Dewey.
Oh my god!
There's Gale.
Oh my god!
And Sydney. Wow, Nurse Campbell aged pretty well. And there's some unexpected returning characters too. Billy Loomis? They're gonna do some Ghostbusters shit here? Get back in the trap, Billy! We find out that Dewey and Gale's relationship never amounted to anything. Again! And after appearing in 5 movies, poor old Dewey finally gets killed off by Ghostface in a hospital. The quietest hospital since Halloween. No, not that Halloween. Halloween 2. After some twists and turns, it all accumulates to the grand final, which, like the opening, mirrors the original. And that's kind of the point, because this movie is a requel. So, before we start stabbing this movie up, if we look at the meta themes of past Scream movies, I think Scream 5 fits in perfectly. Scream 1 made the initial meta leap, referencing famous horror movies, as well as commenting on genre tropes. Scream 2 explored the nature of horror sequels whilst being one itself. Scream 3 was a Scream movie about making a stab movie that explored the Hollywood system and aspects of movie trilogies. Scream 4 commented on the nature of horror remakes and reboots, and finally Scream 5 basically comments on the nature of requels, movies that are not quite remakes and not quite sequels, whilst being one itself. So it follows the pattern of previous movies and what Scream movies do best, assess and comment on the current situation of real-world horror. So far so good, right? Yeah, but the problem is, by their very nature, requels contain some inherent issues that aren't really conducive to making good movies. The first issue with requels is the legacy cast. The original cast have to come back, but can't compete with the new characters too much, and this is a balance that you'll never ever win. If the original characters are in the movie, then fans want the movie to be about them. It's only natural. The Force Awakens is a classic example. The OT cast were totally underused and disrespected, and they would have been better off as either the focus of the movie, or just not in it, period. Now, Force Awakens is an extreme example, and Scream 5 does fare better. Dewey and Gale get some good screen time and some nice moments together. Sydney kicks some ass in the final. They're treated fairly respectfully, nobody gets Luke Skywalkered. Although Dewey kinda gets Han Solo'd. But ultimately, the original cast aren't given much to do. They also don't have the same energy as previous installments, and that's kinda sad to see, whether that's because of the lack of enthusiasm for the script, or just age.
Oh my god!
I'll let you decide. But I feel it's just another problem with bringing back original cast to be supporting characters rather than the main focus. The main focus of which this time falls on new lead, Sam. And she's just not as strong a character as Sydney, nor as strong an actress as Nerve Campbell. If anything, her younger sister Tara, played by Jenna Ortega, steals the spotlight, putting in a stronger performance. Sam just sort of seems to blend into the background a lot of the time. The rest of the cast are actually pretty good performance-wise, but not so fleshed out, because the movie has to divide time between them and the returning cast. You see the problem we got going on here? It's Halloween Kills bloated cast syndrome. Shut the fuck up! The second issue with requels is that you gotta have a strong connection to the original movie in terms of both story and fan service. So that means basically bringing back as much shit as you can to the eventual detriment of the script. They bring back Billy for fan service, so they come up with the idea that Sam is Billy's daughter and that she has paranoid delusions of him. Great, now we can have our Billy scenes. But this actually has to lead somewhere, so they end up making Billy sort of like a ghost hero who saves Sam at the end. The guy was a sick murderer who started all this shit off in the first place. Sure, it's actually Sam tapping into her darker side that she inherited from her father, but it comes across like Billy is a spirit, floating around. And I'll tell you one thing, paranormal shit does not sit well in the Scream universe. Some of this stuff wouldn't matter so much if the plot was tight. But it's not. So, the goal for the killers is to bring Sydney and Gail back to Woodsboro and then kill them and frame Sam, Billy Loomis's daughter, for all the murders. This real-life story would then act as a catalyst for new and improved stab movies. So then why attack Sam at the hospital?
It's not a bad question, Bert.
You can't kill her, because you need to frame her. And also, why attack Tara at the hospital? As we see later, she's used to lure Sam to Stu's old house, and this requires her to be kind of alive. And while we're talking about the hospital, I know I already brought this up, but man, that hospital was quiet. And the problem is that they used this location twice, and it's just as quiet both times. And this oversight just stuck out like a knife in the throat. The transition from day to night is too quick. Dewey and Sam set off for the hospital in the day. It's nighttime before they arrive, and then it's fucking morning when they leave. Where was this hospital? In the fucking Twilight Zone? How fucking big is Woodsboro? Dewey's death presents some issues of its own. After the killers reveal themselves, we now know that the Ghostface fighting Dewey was in fact Amber?
What the fuck, Mindy?
So you're telling me an 18-year-old girl took on a middle-aged man? Sure, the killing blow was a surprise, but before that she was holding her own better than Ultimate fucking Warrior. And although they try to disguise it as a heroic sacrifice, the reality is that it's just a dumb end from a guy who should have known better. He shoots Ghostface in the chest 3 times, gets everyone to the elevator, then goes back to shoot her in the head. He even says,
"You have to shoot them in the head, or they always come back."
So why not just unload right there when you had the chance? And we're not actually sure that he even saves Tara in the end, because we don't really know whether she was in any real danger or not. As I previously mentioned, Tara is used as part of the plan to lure Sam over to Stu's house. So was she supposed to die at the hospital or not? I mean, Ghostface looks pretty intent here, so who the fuck knows? They pull a real fucking Han Solo on this one too, as Dewey dies with a bunch of strangers, and not with any of the people he actually cares about. So there's no doubt that Scream 5 has some issues, but there's a huge amount to balance here. A Scream movie has to succeed in a lot of areas, and one of these areas is in its meta-commentary. And here, Scream 5 has a lot to say. The movie takes stabs at both the new wave of so-called elevated horror and classic slashers alike. Now whether you find these digs funny or offensive will depend on how you like your horror, I guess. Jordan Peele gets a name drop, and Halloween again gets the lion's share of the meta nods, and I think Scream 6 should be a Scream movie about a stab movie that overuses references to Halloween. Is that meta enough for ya? In a nice touch, horror megastars James and Chelsea from the crazy popular YouTube channel Deadmeat make an appearance. It's a funny scene and I love the way Chelsea's screaming, "Just call it fucking Stab Aid," which is a fun poke at Scream 2022 not being called Scream 5. It's great to see horror YouTubers get some of the Hollywood glory instead of the usual gaming and comedy crowd. The patented Scream meta-monologue this time explores toxic fandom, and because horror fans are generally awesome people, they had to reference Star Wars and Ghostbusters to get the point across. The phrase "Mary Sue" is ushered, and in fact, Ruin Johnson the man himself was meant to cameo in the movie. Now let's be clear, I'm not saying that Star Wars fans are toxic, I'm just saying that the more recent controversies of that franchise were used in this movie to bolster the points about toxic elements in fandoms. Basically because there was no horror equivalent or example that was, shall we say, high profile. And the whole requel rhetoric itself spills over to other movie genres. And I think it's because there weren't enough horror examples to use. I mean, they tried to sneak fucking Flatliners behind Black Christmas and Child's Play for fuck's sake.
Black Christmas, Child's Play, Flatliners.
No.
Scream hasn't always exclusively referenced just horror movies, but this was the first time that I felt that other genres and topics that aren't typically inherent to horror movies were influencing the story. Now, despite all this trash talk, I do believe that Scream 5 is a perfectly functional and exciting slasher movie. I know some fans weren't impressed by the opening, but I actually really liked it. As far as Scream opening sequences go, sure, it's less outlandish than, say, Part 4, but there's a couple of nice twists. First off, instead of Ghostface questions mentioning real-life horror movies, the questions are all based on stab movies, which is a nice reverse. And after some brutal attacks, the victim, Tara, actually survives, which again is a nice twist from previous installments. The use of mobile phones is quite clever too. In horror movies, phones are generally seen as lifelines, so the story will usually go out of its way to get rid of them and isolate the characters. From that first classic opening, Scream has always embraced the phone, using it to inflict terror, and it's good to see Scream 5 keep up this tradition. Ghostface using the phone against people by unlocking doors and tracking their every move offer some great criticism about our over-reliance of mobile technology, and honestly I'd have been very happy with just more stuff like this. The pace is fast and it never gets bogged down too long on one scene. Ghostface is always popping up at the right time, and there are plenty of attacks to keep things lively. I was going to say kills, but quite a few people actually survive the movie. And the plot, despite its issues, is intriguing enough to want to find out where it's all leading. I also had a lot of fun trying to guess the killers. Sure, it's pretty easy to figure out, but there was always a bit of doubt and second guessing provided by a few viable red herrings. I think some people will always be disappointed at the killer reveals in these movies, because none will ever live up to the original twist. Probably the same kind of people that expect every Apple product to be a complete game changer, like the iPhone was. There's some great set pieces and sequences, most notably the sheriff and Wes kills. The Wes kill was so full of fake outs I thought Ghostface would never turn up, so I was actually kind of surprised when he did. Wes's death is pretty brutal too. The Scream series is usually light on gore, however Scream 5 gets the gore level nearly perfect. Too much gore and a grounded slasher like Scream can start to appear unrealistic, but there's enough here to keep gorehounds like me interested. The kills are basic but realistic too, and it's a good match. It's just pure slashing and stabbing, no creative slayings, but I think the movie needed and benefits from this, as Scream was never really about the wild kills anyway. So, did Scream 5 give me wood? Spur? As a big fan of slasher movies, honestly, it's the most fun and entertainment I've had with a horror movie for a while, and looking at some of the reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, it's totally slaying it. Slaying it a bit too much. Compared to the original movie, Scream 5 is ranking slightly higher with audiences and slightly lower with critics, but it's very close either way. Is Scream 5 as good as the original?
No.
Fuck no. And I think over time, reviews will adjust to reflect this. Scream 4, in my opinion, was underrated and seems to improve on each viewing, and I think that Scream 5 will see a little of the opposite happening. Did it revive the franchise? Sure looks that way, but with all the callbacks to the original, it feels like Scream has come full circle now, and this movie would be a great place to leave the franchise for another decade. At least until there are enough changes in the horror landscape to comment on. I mean, the movie straight up says that the Scream story shouldn't continue. They essentially made a movie about the pointlessness of making these movies, continuing stories that shouldn't be continued, and I'm just left wondering where the Scream franchise can go with an attitude like this. And I find it a bit hypocritical that Part 6 has already been greenlit.
It's gotta be part of an ongoing storyline, even if the story shouldn't have been ongoing in the first place.
But still, horror more than any other genre thrives on sequels, and fans tend to love them regardless. So whether for good or bad, Scream is back from the dead.